Welcome to What's Bothering Rashi, Parsha Tazriya מצורע Tovshin Pei-Vav. Today we're going to learn Rashi at the beginning of the Parsha Tazriya, Perek Yud Beis, Pasuk Ches. The Torah discusses the korbanos, a woman who gives birth to a baby. When she becomes third, she has to bring two korbanos, an oila and a chatos. In Pasuk Vav it says, Tovi keves ben shnosei la'oila, she has to bring a sheep for an oila, and ben yoino yisor, a bird, for a chatos. In Pasuk Ches we talk about a woman who can't afford a sheep. V'im loitimtzo yodu deiseh, so she brings two birds, echod la'oila ve'echod lechatos. Says Rashi, Dibur Maschil echod la'oila ve'echod lechatos in Pasuk Ches. Lo ikdimo hakosuv elo lemikro'o, avo le'akrovo, chatos koidem le'oila. The Pasuk, when it writes first oila and then chatos, it's only for reading it in that order. We want you to read first oila and then chatos. But le'akrova, when the kohen is makriv, first he's makriv the chatos, and then he's makriv the oila. So in our introduction, in the introduction of What's Bothering Rashi to Chumash Bereshis, we find that there are two types of Rashis. There's a Rashi when something is bothering us in the pasuk, there's a difficulty in the pasuk, and Rashi comes to answer that difficulty. And there we learn Rashi, and we have to ask ourselves, what is bothering Rashi in the pasuk? But there's type 2 comments, and that is when the Torah, the sentence in the Torah might lead to a misunderstanding. And then Rashi comes to make sure you do not make that misunderstanding. And I think this Rashi is type 2. When you read the pasuk, you might come to make a mistake. You might think first you're makriv the oila, and then you're makriv the chatos, because that's the order the pasuk writes it. Comes Rashi and says, no, don't make that mistake. That's only written for reading it in this order. But when the kohen brings the korban, he brings first chatos, and then he brings oila. So whenever you have a Rashi who makes sure you don't make a misunderstanding, we have to ask, how does Rashi know he's right? Maybe the way we misunderstood is the right way, which means maybe we literally bring the oila before the chatos. How does Rashi know that it's only to read it in this order? But when you practically bring it, chatos is first. Where does Rashi know that from? That's what we have to ask ourselves, and sometimes it's difficult to answer, but here Rashi makes it easy, because he tells us himself. He says, we learned it in Zvachim. Parakalatot is Zvachim, Daf Tzadik Omud Aleph, on the bottom, towards the bottom. The Gemara brings a rule. Whenever you bring two korbanos, an oila and a chatos, chatos always comes first. And the truth is, Rashi himself in Parshas Vayikra, in Perek Hey, Pasuk Ches, brings that rule. V'hikriv es asher chatos rishono, chatos kudemes la'oila. Chatos always comes first, before oila. And he brings mashal, the mod of Adoime, the praklit shenichnas l'ratzois. When your attorney walks in to try to speak good about you, ritzo praklit nichnas doren achrov. So first he gets rid of the sin, and then nichnas doren, then he brings a present. So here also, first you bring a chatos, and that's a sin offering. It gets rid of your sin, and then you bring the oila. So in practice, chatos is always brought before the oila. So therefore Rashi here says, when the Chumash says echad le'oila ve'echad lechatos, says Rashi, it's only for reading it in this order, not for how we do it in practice. Okay, so now we know what Rashi says. But we have to ask two questions. The first question is, if in practice we bring chatos before the oila, why does the pasuk write oila and then chatos? Why does the pasuk want us to read it this way? Lo hikdimo hakosuv elo lemikro'o. What's the point in reading oila before chatos? It should say chatos before oila, the way it's literally brought. So the truth is, the Maharal himself seems to come to answer it. The Maharal, the Gur Aryeh on this pasuk, towards the end, says, למיקרו, ואוי דהב למיקרו, משמע למיקרו שלו, דהיינו הכוסוב מקדים אוילו מפני שהיא כולו כוליל, וחשובו יויסר. Oilo is written first because oilo is a more important, more chashuv korban, because it goes up completely to Hashem. Chatos is eaten partly by the koyanim. Oila goes completely up to Hashem. It's a more chashuv korban. So it's written first, even though in practice chatos is brought before the oila. So the Maharal says, and we need to understand it because according to the Maharal, whenever we have two korbanos, oila and chatos, oila should come first in the Chumash, and it's not so. In Parshas Vayikra, it says in Perakei Pasuk Zayin, Echad lechatos ve'echad lo'oila. In next Parsha מצורע, also the מצורע brings two birds. It says chatos before oila. According to the Maharal, the rule should be that oila is always mentioned first because it's a more important korban. That's what the Maharal says. I'd like to suggest another answer as to why the pasuk writes oila before chatos, even though lemaise chatos is brought before the oila. That is, the Gemara Nida says we have to ask first, why does this woman bring a chatos? She had a baby. Chatos is brought for a sin. What sin did the woman do? So the Gemara Nida, Lamed Aleph Amud Beis, Reb Shimon Bar Yochai says, "B'shah shekeras leilet koifetzes v'nishbas shelo tizokek lebaylo." When a woman goes through labor, through pain, it's so painful that she might make a shavua, swear that she doesn't want to have any more children. And for that she brings the chatos. Someone else, Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, says she doesn't literally say it, she thinks it. She's marheres, she thinks she doesn't want to have any more babies, and she makes a shvua in her thought, in her mind. So it's not really a sin. It's not a sin that requires to bring up real chatos. Maybe that's why the Torah changes the order here by Yuledes and writes the oila before the chatos to tell you the chatos here is it's not a real chatos, it's not a real sin this woman committed. Therefore it's written second, even though in practice the Kohen would bring it first, like Rashi said in Parshas Vayikra. But when it's written, we write first oila and then chatos to tell us the chatos this woman is bringing is not for a real sin that she committed. There's another question we could ask on Rashi, and this is a very, very important and fundamental question to ask whenever we see Rashi explaining something. Rashi, when he explains something, when he explains a word, for example, in Chumash, he'll always explain it the first time it appears in the Chumash. So if you have a word that appears in Bereshis, and then appears again in Shmois, and Rashi comments on the word in Shmois, you have to ask yourself, why didn't Rashi explain this word the first time in Bereshis? It's a question. You have to find an answer. So we have a similar question here, because Rashi comments on Pasuk Ches. We have the same thing in Pasuk Vav, when the rich woman brings a sheep for an oila and a bird for a chatos. The oila is mentioned before the chatos. Rashi over there should have said that the order here is only the order the way you read. But when you literally bring it, the chatas comes first. Why does Rashi wait till Pasuk Ches to comment? So the Sifsei Chachamim asks this question right here in Pasuk Ches, and he answers something which I don't understand. He answers that in Pasuk Vav, since the oila is an animal, over there really the oila is brought first, before the chatos. Because the oila is an animal and the chatos is a bird. Which means the rule that chatos is brought before an oila is only when they're equal. If they're two animals or two birds. But if the oila is a keves, like in Pasuk Vav, and the chatos is a bird, so really the oila comes first. So Rashi doesn't have to say anything. That's what the Sifsei Chachamim says, and it's very difficult because the Gemara in Zvachim Daf Tzadik says there's no difference. And even if the oila is an animal, chatos ha'oif kodemes, the oilas behemo. So I thought to answer another answer, and then I found that one of Rashi's Farshim, Tiferes Yosef, Rabbi Yosef Yuzul Segal, a sefer that was printed in 1725. It's not the Saba Min of Ardok, it's years before, 1725. He brings the same answer. As we said, Rashi's coming to make sure you don't make a misunderstanding. So I think the misunderstanding is only a misunderstanding in Pasuk Ches. In Pasuk Vav, we won't make that misunderstanding. Which means, in Pasuk Vav, we won't think that since Oila is mentioned before Chatos, we won't think that you literally bring it first. We'll understand the reason why it's mentioned first is because the Oila is an animal and the Chatos is a bird. So we first mention the more important korbanos. The animal is mentioned first, but no one's going to think from the fact the Oila is mentioned first that we literally bring it first. It's only mentioned first because it's an animal. We mention the animal first, and then we mention the bird. It's only in Pasuk Ches, when we have two birds, and over there the Oila is mentioned first, here I might come to make a misunderstanding. And I might think, why is Oila mentioned first? Maybe you're makriv the Oila first. Says Rashi, no, here also, Lo ikdimu hakasuv elo lemikra. It's only the way you read it. You read Oila before Chatos, but we bring the Chatos as a korban before the korban Oila, as Rashi said before. So now we understand what Rashi says. We understand why he says it, and we also understand why he says it, where he says it. Have a wonderful Shabbos.